What's up, guys? Isaiah from Hot Tag Wrestling, and today I'm coming at you with another installment of Tournamentality, easily the worst titled series in the history of YouTube. Today, we are going to be looking at the 1998 Survivor Series Deadly Games tournament to crown the new WWF champion. In this series, we go through a bunch of different tournaments and rank them, comparing them all to each other to figure out one, what is the best tournament in pro wrestling history, but also to just get a better understanding of what makes a tournament work in the first place. We have a leaderboard, which is super low tech, just a whiteboard that I scribble on. Says Tournamentality at the top. I'm awful at getting this in frame every single time. At the top, currently ranked number one, we have the G1 Climax 34 from 2024. Just below that, King of the Ring 1993, and then sort of a big jump down to the AEW inaugural TNT tournament. And I have one made for Deadly Games there at the bottom. So at the end of the video, we're going to be placing that to figure out where it ranks in that pantheon with only 4 entries of pro wrestling tournaments. And how we're going to decide where it ranks is we're going to go through each bit of the show, the matches, how the match quality, as well as the overall booking of the tournament to figure out where this lies in the history of tournaments. If you guys like the video, please consider subscribing, leaving a like, or leaving a comment, as it really does help me out. But with that being said, let's go ahead and get to why this tournament exists in the first place. So going into this pay-per-view, there was a lot of shenanigans revolving around the WWF Championship. Steve Austin was the champion in the summer of 1998, and he was in sort of this triple threat feud with The Undertaker and Mankind, and essentially they both pinned him at the same time, which meant they were both champion, but you can't have two champions, so they decided to vacate the championship and have an Undertaker versus Kane match, which led to a screwy finish and a non-finish. So the title was still vacated, which led to this pay-per-view. And screwy booking and unsatisfactory results and things that just don't generally make sense are a staple of one man in particular. Pro wrestling fans know the person who is most in love with throwing some whack ass finish, some weird idea on the table just because, hey, it's a swerve, bro, is Vince Russo. And this tournament is generally considered Vince Russo's magnum opus, one of the only things that he ever did right in his career as a booker for WWF and also WCW. And all of the shenanigans that normally go around Vince Russo, a lot of people think they coalesced here to just strike the perfect temperature and really create a great story long pay-per-view. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think that this is like, oh, everything in this tournament works the way it should. I feel a lot of stuff that happens in this tournament sort of is glaring sports entertainment nonsense that stands out as just being a little bit odd. But how we're going to analyze it is we're going to go through match by match. So I'm only discussing tournament matches. So there was a women's match and a tag match on this show, but I am not going to be discussing those, just matches influencing the tournament. And I feel like the idea for it was awesome. I love a tournament for the top championship, especially when you're throwing a lot of your top talent into the mix. But I feel like the execution was sloppy a lot of the time. There was a lot of people who you look at this tournament and say, there's no way that person is going to go to the finals and win this tournament. It's just impossible for Al Snow to become the WWF champion when you have The Rock and Mankind and Undertaker and Kane and Austin in this tournament. So the believability, even just looking at the match graphics, is a little low for some of the matches. But what I'll say this pay-per-view did well is everything looked great. Great entrances, great presentations for all the wrestlers, a really hot crowd, a really great stage. The packaging around everything was pretty much perfect, but I don't necessarily think the action in ring could hold up throughout the night. But we're going to discuss that as we go into our first match. So let's start with Mankind going up against a mystery opponent. So Mankind was scheduled to have a mystery opponent hand selected by Vince McMahon in this first section of the tournament. And one of the story beats that they were hitting over the course of the night was that Mankind was the hand selected person by the McMahon family for who they wanted to win the WWF Championship because they feel they could manipulate him into doing whatever they wanted. So McMahon selected for his opponent Dwayne Gill, better known as Gilbert. It was more of an angle than a match. It lasted 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Mankind was wrestling in a tuxedo for some reason, which would be a theme of the night. And yeah, it was just sort of a nothing comedy angle, really more than it was a match. But I liked it. I liked it as a way to start the show because it hit a story beat really hard in the beginning. That McMahon was trying to orchestrate this tournament to do two things: one, keep the title off of Steve Austin, and two, keep the title off of The Rock. And him picking Mankind and trying to make him fresh throughout the tournament and give him as many little bonuses and perks as he could throughout to make his job easier of getting to the finals and win the title. It was a really nice story throughout the entirety of the show. So even though this was a comedy angle to start out the show, I really liked it. Next, we had Jeff Jarrett taking on Al Snow, and this is one of the examples I talked about earlier of two guys who no one could realistically believe would ever win this tournament. Mid-carders who have always been booked as mid-carders, never even flirted with a heavyweight title run up to that point. So there was just no credibility in this match, and the fan investment was sort of lacking as a result. But what I will say in this match's favor is two guys who know how to maximize their minutes. They went out there and just threw everything they could at the table. It's only a 4-minute match, but they really threw a lot into it to try to get the crowd on their side. But after about 4 minutes, Al Snow won with a headshot, and pretty good. Pretty good match. Weren't given a lot of time, weren't given a lot of booking. No one really believed them, but they made the best with what they had. Next, we had Steve Austin going up against the Big Boss Man. And I really like this from a booking perspective because you have McMahon's biggest enemy in Austin going up against his biggest crony in the Big Boss Man. It was a pretty short match, pretty simple story. Boss Man got disqualified pretty early on so he could beat Austin down with a nightstick. And it was never really Boss Man's intention to win this match. He just wanted to injure Steve Austin so that he couldn't go further in the tournament. Or if he did go further, that he would have an injury carrying with him so he wouldn't be able to succeed longer and win the title. A pretty nothing match, but I thought it was a good angle that would carry some serious ramifications throughout the rest of the show. So I liked it. I liked this part a lot. Next, we had X-Pac going up against Steven Regal, the future William Regal, and the match was decent enough. X-Pac is one of those guys who's really good at maximizing his minutes, but Steven Regal took the majority of the offense in this match and really slowed it down in a prolonged heel heat sequence. It just didn't do a lot for me. It wasn't a great match. Like, it wasn't bad, but it was just sort of there. And it was longer than the other matches we've gotten previously. So it just sort of stood out as being a little bit of a bland spot on the show. And it had a incredibly stupid finish as well. They were on the outside fighting and they both got a double countout. Now McMahon obviously was furious with this because if they got a double countout, that means Steve Austin would get a bye in the next round and he wouldn't have to face anyone in the quarterfinal round. So McMahon goes out and restarts the match. But then X-Pac and Regal just walk off. And neither of them even attempt to go back in the ring. They restart. They're basically fighting on the entrance ramp. One of McMahon's cronies runs down, tells the ref to restart the match. He does restart the match, but then both guys just leave. Like, I'm not doing a good job at explaining this really because it made absolutely no sense. My mind can't even really place in fiction what those wrestlers were thinking to have just walked out on a match for the WWF Championship. It didn't make sense within the sense of a match, and it also didn't make sense in the larger scope of the tournament. Because if you are trying to portray Austin as one of your big baby faces and you're trying to push the story that McMahon is trying to screw Austin as much as possible, then you had a good start. Big Boss Man beating down Steve Austin in their match to potentially injure him. But then why would he get a bye in the quarterfinals? Like, I like the idea of these guys having a double countout, but then McMahon restarts the match and one of them wins, like Steven Regal wins, and then faces Austin in the quarterfinals just to further try to screw Austin. And it's McMahon pulling his power in ways that he shouldn't, but they just don't do it. They don't give Austin an opponent for the next round. So that story of his injury falls apart. The story of McMahon screwing him doesn't really have enough emotional weight as you get into the next round. So the audience isn't really rooting for Austin as much as they should be, apart from the fact that he's Steve Austin, the biggest babyface in the world. The result just made no sense. It made the match feel pointless and also didn't inform the other story beats they were building with Steve Austin versus Vince McMahon. And this is one of the things I was talking about earlier. They have some really, really cool booking ideas in this tournament, giving Mankind the bye because he's McMahon's favorite, trying to screw Austin by Boss Man getting himself disqualified so that he would struggle throughout the rest of the tournament. Really, really good, strong ideas, the kind of booking ideas that a tournament thrives on. But they just don't follow it up well. They just have some crap ideas in there as well, like this double DQ finish that doesn't fit in or play into those other stories that they're telling. I honestly have no idea why they did this. It doesn't even make sense to me. Like, the most obvious route is to give Austin an opponent to start to get the crowd behind him more, and they just completely forego that. It's such a weird dichotomy watching this tournament where you have a lot of really cool ideas that make tournaments interesting, followed by, yeah, that's Vince Russo. That makes sense. Next, we were looking at Ken Shamrock versus Goldust, a pretty standard match. Nothing to talk about really, other than Ken Shamrock trying a Hurricane Rana and landing straight on the top of his head. Eventually, Shamrock made Goldust tap out with an ankle lock after probably like 5 minutes. And this match really suffered from being outside the main event vortex. The main storylines of the night were Steve Austin, Mankind, The Rock, and Vince McMahon. And anything that fell outside of that bubble really suffered because the crowd didn't really have any investment in what was happening. They don't care about Shamrock, they don't care about Goldust because they're not feeding into the main story of the night. And with tournaments, it can sometimes be hard to give those mid-card filler matches importance and to really make them seem unique. But you can do it. You can incorporate prior character beats. Like, if two people have had a feud in the past, putting them in here to have a rematch is a great way to instantly engage the fans, or putting two people in there who will have a great match together to pull the fans in. But these guys don't have any history, Ken Shamrock and Goldust, that is, and you didn't give them enough time to have a great match. So yeah, it's just not great booking and not really putting importance outside of the main storyline of the pay-per-view. Next, we have our final first round match before moving into the quarterfinals. And I only talked about 7 matches because there are only 7 matches in the first round. We'll talk about why in a minute. But we had The Rock versus Big Boss Man. This was originally scheduled to be The Rock versus Triple H, but for some reason, Triple H just didn't show up in the building. JR on commentary said, yeah, I guess he just didn't want to show up. It didn't make sense. I don't know. I wasn't watching at the time, so this is one of those things that I just chalk up to, oh, there's a larger storyline going on for why Triple H wasn't here that I'm just not aware of. So I'm not going to touch on it too much. I just feel like I'm sort of out of the loop on why Triple H didn't end up showing up. But Vince McMahon said, okay, Rock, your opponent's not here, but you don't get a bye. I have selected another opponent for you. And he ended up sending out Big Boss Man again to once again try to screw over one of the favorites in the tournament. And I loved this booking. I love this match because Boss Man rolls in the ring. Rock immediately hits him with a rock bottom and gets the pin in like 4 or 5 seconds. I thought it was great booking, the way it juxtaposed the Steve Austin versus Big Boss Man match earlier in the night and showed The Rock to be a clever babyface, which you're pushing him hard in this tournament, so that's a good thing to do. I thought it was really, really good. I thought it was a unique piece of booking that differentiated itself from the rest of the matches in this tournament and really gave the fans a reason to get behind The Rock in a different way than they had to get behind Steve Austin. Steve Austin, they should get behind because he was this big fighting babyface who's overcoming some obstacles, even though they didn't give him a quarter round or a quarterfinal match. And The Rock was someone you should support because he's the smartest guy. He can find the loopholes and outmaneuver Vince McMahon to succeed. So I thought this was a really, really unique piece of booking to end the first round matches. Next, we're into the quarterfinals, and we are looking at Undertaker versus Kane. And they both got a bye in the first round because they had the match previously where it ended in a double DQ and neither of them were crowned champion. So they were put together early, like later in the tournament. And the reason that was given is because Vince McMahon wanted them to brutalize each other and kill each other because he didn't want either of these guys to be champion either, which I think is a unique story beat and could influence a pretty good match. But then you remember it's Undertaker versus Kane. And I realistically don't know if these guys have ever had a good match together. They always have, it's always just mid. I don't ever remember them having something actively terrible. It's always just boring and plotting. And that is what this match is. Undertaker wins. Some people popped in the building. I don't care. It was a boring match, and I'm not excited to see 1998 Undertaker wrestle some more in this tournament. Next, we had Mankind taking on Al Snow. And at this point on commentary, they said Mankind was wearing the tuxedo to try and impress Vince McMahon, which is a little bit goofy, I guess, and a little bit funny in keeping in with his character. Pretty nothing match, nothing to really talk about. Like, just not a lot of good in-ring action on the night up to this point. That's one thing I'll pause to say about this tournament with this match is there's only one really good match in the tournament. Everything else is just sort of I guess it's all right. Like there's nothing terrible. Like Undertaker versus Kane was probably the most boring or egregious match on the card, but everything else is just sort of mid. And this match was just mid. There was a spot in it where one of them used a chair to hit the other one and it didn't cause a DQ, even though Big Boss Man earlier in the night hit someone with a nightstick and it did cause a DQ. No real consistency there. And it ended when Al Snow gave up to Mr. Socko. Mankind moves on. That's all this match served to do was give Mankind to the next round. Not a good match, didn't create a story, just whatever. Next was The Rock versus Ken Shamrock, and this was an actively boring match throughout. There were some offensively long rest holds by Ken Shamrock, chin locks, headlocks that went on, they probably went on for whatever, 30 seconds. It felt like minutes when I was watching it. It was so slow, so tedious. It did come alive a little bit at the end when Rocky started getting the hot babyface comeback and started beating up Shamrock, but it did little to enthuse me after seeing a whole bunch of just nothingness beforehand. I will say though, this match had an incredible, incredible finish. So Big Boss Man came down and he was trying to make it so The Rock could lose because he works for Vince McMahon and McMahon hates The Rock. So he took out his nightstick, threw it to Ken Shamrock while the ref was distracted so Shamrock could catch it and hit The Rock with it and win the match. But The Rock jumped midair, caught the nightstick instead, and in one motion hit Shamrock right on the dome. It was an amazing finish. It was such just like the physical impressiveness for The Rock to be there, catch it, have that hand-eye coordination, and then hit Shamrock all before the ref turned around. It was a lot of fun. Didn't save the match though. It was a great finish from a very, very boring match. And once again, it is just one of those matches that serves to move The Rock ahead in the tournament. He didn't really sustain any significant damage here. Like Ken Shamrock wasn't working over a limb or anything like that. It was just sort of like it was there, and now The Rock's moving on to the next round. Who cares? We're now into the semifinals where we're seeing Steve Austin face Mankind and The Rock face The Undertaker. And we're going to start with Steve Austin versus Mankind. Easily the best match of the tournament. The only really, really good match of the tournament, I would say. I don't think it's a great match. I think it's just shy of that, but it was really, really good. Pretty great action throughout. And I think this is for several reasons. One, it's because it's Austin versus Mankind, and they always have good matches together, two of the best workers of their generation. But also, this is the cataclysm of the story they have been telling all night. Mankind is McMahon's chosen boy. Austin is the one he hates the most. And now they're coming together. So there's this ingrained story that influences all the action, and the crowd is really coming up for it. Just everything was hitting in this match like it was supposed to. It felt like a big deal. And when you have a card like this that has so much nothing on it, there's just so much filler throughout. When the action actually comes together in a big way, it feels like a really, really big deal. And it ended when Austin was going to get the win on Mankind by hitting him with a stunner, but Vince pulled him out of the ring, and a new ref came down, and he was counting the three. And when I was watching this, it sort of reminded me of the CM Punk screwing over Drew McIntyre finish from last year, where Shane slid into the ring, counted one, counted two, and then flipped the double bird to Austin and got out of there. And it's just, they did a really effective job in this match about telling the audience that McMahon is screwing over Austin at every point, and Austin would have had this match won had McMahon not screwed him over. Like I said, it could have been more effective if they had him wrestle in the quarterfinals, but I think they did enough to make it up afterwards. Eventually, Mankind did get the win. They screwed Austin out of the victory, and Mankind then moves on to the finals. And in our other semifinal match, we had The Rock taking on The Undertaker. A really predictable ending, given that Mankind, the heel in the tournament, was going to the finals already. You knew The Rock was going to win this. You knew they're not going to push The Undertaker through and have a heel versus heel final to one of the big four pay-per-views. They just didn't do enough to really convince you that the outcome was ever in doubt. If they had done this match before Austin versus Mankind, it would have all been up in the air, because yes, it would make sense for Mankind, the heel, to face The Rock, the face, but also Rock versus Austin is one of the biggest feuds of all time, and we hadn't seen it at WrestleMania up to that point. So getting that combination in the finals was sort of like a mouth-watering treat. So if they had just flipped these matches, this match would have had a lot more drama to it. Well, I shouldn't say a lot, maybe a little bit more drama, because this match was boring. It was 1998 Undertaker, the worst version of Undertaker, slow, a lot of punches, not a lot of anything else. And the finish to this match sucked. Big Boss Man came down for the third time in the night, and it's just the law of diminishing returns, where him coming out again and again and again, rather than going, oh no, not this guy again, you go, oh no, not this guy again. It's not like you're upset that he's down there because he's going to screw your favorite guy out of a win. You're upset that he's down there because he's boring and you don't like to see him anymore. Eventually, it ended when Kane chokeslammed The Rock for a DQ finish. So The Rock won by DQ to move on to the finals. A terrible booking idea, in my opinion, because if you are going under the impression that The Rock is supposed to now be the big babyface who's going to go and fight in the finals against Mankind, having him win by DQ and basically like slipping on a banana peel to get the win, it's not only a lame ending to the match, it doesn't fit within the booking of the tournament. It was a bad match, and apart from like just some of the squash matches, I think it was easily the worst match on the card thus far. Now we're in the finals, the main event, The Rock versus Mankind. And Mankind, in my opinion, is definitely the MVP of this tournament. He's been having good matches throughout. His match with Austin was very good. And this, while not as good, it's just a tick under, was still a very good match. Probably the second best match of the tournament, behind his match with Austin. And the finish to this match was more cute than it was good, in my opinion. So if you don't know, The way this match ends is The Rock has Mankind in a sharpshooter, and McMahon calls for the bell. And it's a big swerve because you thought McMahon was backing Mankind the entire tournament, but actually he wanted The Rock to win. And The Rock had this big heel turn where he turned against the audience to join McMahon and Shane at this point, the McMahons, and be the big heel champion in the company. And it did a few things right. It referenced back to the Montreal Screwjob from the year before, which was still very much in the minds of the fans, and it did a good job about setting up the next few months of story with The Rock facing off against Mankind in a lot of really great matches, ladder matches, the Boiler Room Brawl, and just a lot of singles matches on Raw. So it informed a lot of the things that were going to be going forward. Set The Rock up as the next top heel at the top of the card for eventually uh, Austin to face at next year's WrestleMania. I think there was a lot of good in there, but I can't say the finish was necessarily great. I think a lot of fans were initially confused when it happened, and when the dust settled, it was a very effective storyline. I just don't think the execution of it was necessarily great. But I like the idea of it. I do like the idea, even if I don't love the execution. And I feel that it was honestly a very strong way to end what was mostly a pretty middling tournament. And those are all the matches from the tournament. Now let's get some overarching thoughts on it. I thought this tournament was good, but not great. I thought it had a lot of unique ideas in it that I liked watching. I like the swerve at the end with McMahon betraying Mankind, going with The Rock. I like McMahon screwing Austin out of the tournament. And I like some of the Big Boss Man implications in there. I feel like he played his part well, a few too many times, but mostly good. I just feel like a lot of the execution was very poor. Like the mid card matches were nothing. They fell outside the main event bubble, which I said earlier, and they weren't really given enough time to be actually great matches. So there was just a lot of filler nothingness on this card. There You can't go back and watch the matches in isolation other than Austin versus Mankind. That's really the only one that would be worth going back and watching. The rest of the stuff is just sort of whatever. And the finals, of course. I think the finals were good. But outside of those two matches, there's just nothing to really enjoy going back and watching. You have to watch this tournament as a whole. You can't isolate individual bits for praise. And it is good to tell an overarching story, but each story beat along the way also needs to be good and effective and hold the audience into what they are watching. And this, I feel like, just didn't do a good enough job. I feel like the ideas that went into this tournament, honestly, were very, very good. And I don't know whether I should be giving Vince Russo praise for that. I wouldn't like to be, but I feel like a lot of the ideas in here were very Vince Russo esque, and I would like to give him a shout out for that. But the execution in points was very sloppy. Why wasn't Triple H there? Why did X Pac and William Regal do the double count out? Like, why wasn't Austin more screwed? Why didn't Ken Shamrock work over The Rock more? There's just so many things that I think are obvious booking decisions that they could have done better, and they just completely missed. They didn't do it. I feel like they really nailed some of the intricacies of the tournament and some of the more complex ideas, but failed to really nail the simple stuff, these simple booking tournament ideas that you see in every tournament. They just messed those up completely. So it's at this weird middle ground for me where I really like some of the ideas that they have, but I'm like, why couldn't you just do it right? Why do you have to be so WWF? Why can't you just do wrestling right? You always have to have these weird little twists and turns that don't always make sense. You can't just tell a logical story throughout. You have to be weird and Jerry Springer-esque and always throwing in this new development. So it's really this weird dichotomy to try to analyze this tournament through. I think it was good in places, bad in others. That's my overall thought on it. Nothing great, nothing terrible, just sort of floating in that miasma of midness. But with that said, let's see where it ranks compared to our other tournaments. So for our other tournaments, we have the G1 Climax from 2024, the 1993 King of the Ring, and the inaugural TNT title tournament. I'm going to bring this up on screen so you can see it, but it's going to like completely mess up my light and blacken out my face, so you're not going to be able to see me for a minute. So those are our three tournaments that we are looking at so far. So where does Survivor Series 98 rank among these? I definitely don't think it's better than the G1 Climax 34 because I don't feel like any of the matches from Survivor Series comes close to some of the stuff that was produced here. I also don't think it's good as King of the Ring 1993. I feel like the booking decisions made in this tournament were more consistently smart throughout the tournament. There was nothing in this tournament where I was really scratching my head going, why did they do that? Why did they make that decision like I was for Survivor Series? And though I feel that Survivor Series might have had a more interesting payoff, like this was a little bit straightforward, just like tournament booking 101. I sort of prefer the basics done well than all of this screwy stuff done a little bit weird. So really I have to decide whether it's going above or below the inaugural TNT title tournament. And one thing that's going in Survivor Series' favor is that this took place during the pandemic. So there's not a lot of hot crowds there to really get into the wrestling and to give the wrestling a good reaction. Whereas this had an insanely hot crowd throughout the entirety of the night. Also, even though it is an AEW tournament, I don't necessarily think I spelled inaugural wrong, didn't I? Just realizing I think I spelled inaugural wrong. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I'll fix that later. The action in this tournament wasn't great either. I think Cody versus Lance in the finals was a really good match, but other than that, it was just sort of a lot of mid stuff. So this can't even really support the matches that you would normally associate with AEW. So I'm going to move this down. And I do think that Survivor Series 98, the Deadly Games tournament, is a superior tournament to the inaugural AEW TNT title tournament. So I'm putting that above. So this is our new ranking. We got 4 tournaments in there now. TNT is at the bottom. Our new one, Survivor Series 98, is at third. King of the Ring 93 at number 2, and G1 Climax 34 at number 1. So I want to know what you guys thought. Do you agree with my ranking on our Tournamentality board? Do you think it should have been above King of the Ring 1993, or do you agree with some of my gripes about it and maybe it should have been at the bottom? I want to know below. I also want to know, if you go back and watch this tournament, what's your favorite match from Survivor Series 98? I don't think anything can hold a candle to Steve Austin versus Mankind, but I want to know your guys' opinions down below. While you're down there leaving a comment, please like and subscribe, as it really does help a new channel like mine to grow. But with all of that being said, I have been Isaiah from Hot Tag Wrestling. I would like to thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.